Hi everyone, this is Victoria Hendrickson from OrgVitality. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two. Hi everyone, this is Victoria Hendrickson from OrgVitality. Thanks for joining the webinar. I see a couple of people are still logging in here, so we're going to give it just a minute or so and then we'll get started. Thanks for your patience. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining the webinar. My name is Victoria Hendrickson from OrgVitality, and I will be presenting today's session. So today's called Optimizing Your Survey, Nudging for Survey Action. This has been a popular topic for us this year. This is actually the second of a two-part series on nudging within surveys. So I'm glad to see that so many of you were able to make it back for part two, as well as plenty of new attendees that didn't make it for the first session. So when we're finished with today's session, if you'd like the first recording about collecting more useful data, happy to send it all to you. I will be reaching out to everyone who's attending here on the phone after the session. I'll be sending over slides from today as well as the recording. So I'm happy to connect with all of you in that way and get you links to any of our other webinars as you're interested. So some housekeeping notes, you're all on mute and we'll be getting the slides after. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, we should have a couple of minutes at the end to get to them. So please go ahead and type them into the GoToMeeting chat box. And of course, if we run out of time, I'm happy to answer any of those questions via email. So with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and dive on in. We've got a quick session here, just 30 minutes. So we'll go ahead and get started. First thing here is quick intro on me and some of my research and why I'm the one here chatting with you all about nudges. I'm a partner and vice president here at OrgVitality, background in PhD in organizational psychology. I work primarily in our employee research and employee survey practice. And I do research on a number of things, including nudging for useful feedback, as well as inclusion and diversity and other kinds of employee research topics. You know, a note about the research specifically on nudges. I've been presenting on this since about 2014, and the conversation's changed quite a bit in just a few years in a way that it doesn't in other topics in IO research. Just a couple years ago when we started presenting on this in conferences, there were a lot of questions of, well, what are you talking about? What's a nudge? What does it have to do with psychology? And what does it have to do with employee surveys and you know, org effectiveness kinds of work? And I think now the consciousness is much higher about what nudges are. You know, we see them both in the industry as well as out in the world in general. So it's becoming much more popular as people know what nudges are and are looking for ways to implement them in their survey practice or other, you know, HR kinds of initiatives. So it's great to see so much interest and application of this kind of research. So although there is a fair amount of consciousness of what nudges are, there is some ambiguity in the industry of the exact definition and how it's used in survey practice. So I am going to go through a quick definition, not as in-depth as the intro on nudges from last week. So, you know, again, if you missed that introduction last week, I am happy to send that over. But just as a quick refresher, when we talk about a nudge, we are talking about a concept that comes from the field of behavioral economics. And in particular, if you're looking for a primer on it, I highly recommend this book by Thaler and Sunstein called Nudge itself. And they define a nudge as setting up choice architecture to alter behavior in a predictable way without removing options or changing incentives. So we're not making it you know, economically, you know, better for someone to make a particular choice, but we're trying to make it easier for them to live up to their own good intentions or make it easier for them to make positive behavior change. So if we're to think about that in IO context, I think about nudges as setting up broader systems in a way that promote positive behavior change. When we design nudges in our programs, we're usually thinking about how we can help people live up to their own commitments, whether it's how to provide helpful feedback, how to stick with an improvement plan, how to live up to the commitments they made to their team. And I've got a couple of examples that we are playfully calling nudge or not. So the screen looks a little busy. There are a couple of examples of potential nudges on here that I want to go through and talk about, does this really fit the definition of what a nudge is? So each of these were actually sent by attendees from last week. I put out a challenge for everyone to send me their best nudge, and of course the winner is going to receive a copy of Thaler's new book called Misbehaving. But real quick, just to talk about what's on screen here, what these potential nudges are. I'll start from left to right. On the far left, we've got a meme that showed up in the intro page for someone's survey. So this is for a really long survey where they need subject matter experts to fill out a lengthy job analysis in order to get good data and move that forward. And so the intervention here is to, remind subject matter experts that we really need your feedback. We're counting on you. You're not just another survey taker. You've got really valuable feedback. So the one right next to that in the middle is a set of 2 snack jars. The one on the left has a healthy salad, and it's a clear jar. I can see what's inside of it. I can see that's something my doctor would probably want me to eat. And on the right, I can't see what's inside. It happens to be that one's got some candy in it, but I can't see until I decide to open that up. So the idea there is, it would be easier for me to choose the healthy one that I can see. In the middle of the screen, we've got a reminder saying survey action, the time is now. And then on the right, we've got a choice between escalator and stairs. So, I can choose either, but the ground around the stairs is made to look like a track so that I kind of stay on that path of going up and down the stairs rather than taking the escalator in the middle. So really a range of things here. Some are super survey applicable, some are things we've seen out in the world. From here, I'm going to move to a couple of definitions and criteria of a nudge, and then we'll step back, look at these again, and say, which of these really are a nudge. There's kind of a range on the page here. So start thinking about it, maybe mark your votes down, what you think might be a nudge or not. And for now, we'll talk about how nudges work. So those of you that attended last week will remember that nudges work by using heuristics or mental shortcuts that help reduce cognitive load and make good choices easier. So the first way we often do that is to invoke social pressure. We can highlight social desirable effects to help people make decisions that they feel are making the right choice. In the last webinar, we talked about survey reminders, and the most effective reminder in our research is one that tells people that most other employees have responded. So don't they want to make sure they aren't left off? Don't they want to make sure they have a chance to make their voice heard? Another approach to nudging is framing or invoking the availability heuristic. And this involves making the positive choice more obvious and available. It makes it come to mind a little quicker. So in the last webinar, we talked about framing up the comment section on surveys. So for this, we alter the directions. So in the directions for the comment section, we tell people what kind of details a useful comment contains, and we provide a specific space for them to provide each of those parameters. They can still write whatever they want, but they have a sense of what kind of feedback is more likely to be useful. And then the final thing we've got here is changing the default. So of all the nudge types, research shows that this tends to be the most effective. A familiar example here is in the way 401k programs work. So traditionally, it used to be that if you join a new job and you're setting up your 401k program, you have to opt in. And the opt-in rates were a little low. So that's changed with a lot of research. So now a lot of programs sign people up by default. So they can still choose to opt out rather than opting in. Choice is still there, but the system makes it easier for them to make the positive choice of being active in the program. So those are some of the foundations of nudges, but we do need a couple of criteria in place to design a lasting nudge, something that's going to continue to have positive behavior change over time. I want to say there's a lot of design that goes into nudges and making sure they're effective, but at their core, they should be really simple. They should be very obvious to users. We're not looking for a lot of complexity here. The goal of a nudge is to reduce cognitive load in order to help people make their own positive behavior change, the kind that helps them live up to their own good intentions. So with survey actions, this is often reminding managers of their own commitments to themselves and to the team to drive improvement. So with those pieces in place, I'm going to return back to our nudge examples and see, which of these really is a nudge or not. First one I'm going to start with is the one in the background, the one that was also on the title slide of this deck, the one that is a reminder for survey action to happen now. And I'm going to say right off, this one's not really a nudge. Reminders and pop-ups can be really useful, but reminders on their own are not a nudge. They are not reducing cognitive load or complexity. They're not helping me make a choice. Now, if this reminder were paired with some information or some tools that helped me make that action, it might be different, but the pop-up on its own, not a nudge. And this applies to a lot of different reminders we see out there. The second one in the far left corner, this one I'm going to tentatively say is nudgy. It might not be a solid definition of a nudge, but what we're doing here is we're framing up what kind of feedback we need from people. We need their subject matter expertise, and we're encouraging them to take the survey in a new way. So I'm going to say that goes along with a lot of the principles of a nudge. Next one we've got here is the track up on the far right. I'm going to say this one's a nudge. So here we are, reducing the cognitive load of, the choice of which of these ways should people take up the stairs, but we're not changing the incentives. We're not making it in any way easier. And then the final one in the middle of the page, those jars, I'm going to say that's a nudge as well. I can still choose either of those snacks, but it is taking a lot of the thinking out as far as which of these is better for me. I'm just more likely to reach over for that healthy one. So some great examples here, good range. And that's really going to take us to some survey-based examples. So if we want to move away from these general examples and into how all of you on the phone can use these foundations in your surveys, let's start with why we might nudge in surveys. Some context around manager behavior related to survey-based change. One, we know managers want to improve the workplace. Survey goals are to improve the workplace. Survey assignments are complex, data-based exercises. So this is really a good opportunity to use nudges to reduce complexity and help managers or other stakeholders live up to their own good intentions about how to use data to drive improvement. In the last webinar, we talked about how to nudge to get high-quality data to draw insights from. So today we're going to focus on the other end of the survey process, action planning. Here, the assumption is you've got data ready to go and you want to help managers use that data to drive meaningful change in their teams. We know they want to make things better, but action planning activity can be surprisingly low or inconsistent across the organization. And that discrepancy between intent and action is often due to survey plans getting buried under other business priorities. We've all seen conversations like those on the screen here. We want to help managers focus on action planning, but they're just too busy. Often when our HR partners talk to managers about action planning or they ask where they're getting started, the answer is that, well, the manager's too busy. They might just pick the item that's lowest to work on, or they might just pick what their boss is working on because they don't know what to do. They don't have time to analyze results. And so, worst case, they might even put it off for later and never get back to it. And since all of us on the phone work so hard to get survey results to push through the organization, this is a really frustrating barrier to change. So, with all of this in mind today, I'm going to go through a couple of nudges that help managers get to the heart of action planning and push some improvement plans throughout the organization without having to become survey experts themselves. So, first challenge is really about getting started, and that's about getting managers off the metaphorical couch to commit to action planning. In the early stages of this, we want to raise awareness around the assignment of action planning. We want it to be clear what's expected of them, when, and what kind of resources they have to make it happen. So here, the nudge is really about framing up survey action among other important business priorities, and then using social pressure to remind them of those commitments that they made. So if you've got an annual survey and you've got an annual budget forecasting process, you might consider how to time them together so that as managers are thinking through budgets, they can incorporate any changes from their survey action plans. Then different communications and forums can incorporate them together, and they start to be bundled in a way that makes it easier to think about. And then through time, we want to continue to remind managers of that commitment they made throughout those integrated systems. So one tool we use to do this at OrgVitality is our nudge engine. In our tool, master users have the ability to send well-timed, informative communications to managers based on their usage of the results or action tool. So let's say your survey's closed recently, and you can see that most managers haven't logged into the tool to download their report. You can filter for all the managers that haven't yet logged in, send them a note that includes information on the benefits of addressing results early, some tips on getting started, maybe even instructions on how to get into the data. Same can be done around logging action plans or completing action steps on time. The goal here is to combine the communication with information that reminds the user of their commitment and gives them some resources that help make that commitment easier to complete. All right, on to the second challenge. Let's say that most of your managers have their data and they're committed to action planning. They really want to get started. That leaves the big question of what they should work on. How do they know they're spending time on something that matters and something that's really going to drive change? Now, you may have some managers that spend a ton of time understanding their results and really thinking through which survey items will have the most impact on their team. But you're also going to have plenty of managers that just want a simple template of what to do and helps them get started quickly. So while we'd love each manager to become a survey expert and go through this in depth, we know they often won't or can't for different reasons. So we want to start with that base level, that template. We want to give everyone an easy to default to begin with. Of course, if they do more, that's better, but that way we know everyone has something really solid to start from. So we found that a great nudge here is to include a default of what managers should work on. So in our action planning tool, we set a default for what managers should work on to have the most impact. They can, of course, change it, but the recommendations are based on their results, strategic importance to the organization, and some of our proprietary research. So the suggestions are a good place to start and at least give a manager a beginning point so they're never working with that blank page and never get frustrated with that aspect. So if you want to think about applying this nudge in your own organization, think about setting clear expectations for what's to happen company-wide and what's to happen in local level action planning. What are those assignments? What are people expected to do? And this is a little bit about what the nudge looks like. So as managers are reviewing their results, we point them to which items are going to have the most impact on action planning, and we add them to their action area by default. Again, they can change it, they can modify it, and make it a little more customized to their team. And we do encourage them to do this, think through it and make edits, but the overall goal is to reduce the cognitive load in getting started. So this way we make sure that they follow through on their commitment to work on something. They follow through on that commitment to get off the couch and get started. And they're starting with something that's going to be at least fairly customized to their results and likely to move things forward so that in future years, they're going to have a sense of how this works and a sense of being able to set a good plan and get this done. All right, on to the third challenge here. Once we've worked through, managers knowing what to work on, whether it's on their own or with the help of some suggestions like we've looked at, the next challenge is making sure that they create quality plans that are likely to lead to success, something they can actually do that'll have some impact. One thing we find is that a lot of managers, especially those that are new at dealing with survey results, will create well-intentioned but complicated action plans that are unlikely to be sustainable. The boil the ocean kind of action plans where they want to work on everything and they've got some really detailed steps to make it happen. The intent is great, but a lot of us on the phone know that they're unlikely to be sustainable over time and to stay top of mind. So the nudge here is the availability heuristic. We want to make it obvious how to create a good plan, one that's likely to lead to success. So what we can do here is we can frame up some examples and we can give tips on what to include. Often in this stage, a little bit of information will go a long way, whether it's helping managers on how to write a SMART goal, telling them what kind of criteria to involve in the plan, like having dates for each step, markers of success, or Even just providing them background on the kind of topic they're working on. This can help managers plan for conversations with their team and frame up something that's likely to lead to success. So in our action planning tool, we bake these in each step. Once a manager has decided what they want to work on, we offer resources and further information on the topic. And that helps them both, understand that topic in further depth and give them some conversation starters for when they're going to talk to their team to get more details on what this really looks like for them. We also offer up starter ideas of how they might address the topic. And the idea isn't for them to do exactly what the tool says. In fact, we'd like them to edit it and make it more custom to their organization. But we want to give them a frame of what kinds of things they might do, what kind of level of detail is about right, to give them a template in their head and really help them jumpstart their planning. Part of this nudge is also in the defaults. So we're providing data fields and parameters around each component of a good action plan. So you can see some of those on the screen here with the arrows. There are places to record each task, along with a date, a status, and an owner. Really simple details, but this helps the manager think through each component of their plan. If there aren't clear dates or clear markers of success, the plan might need some work. If those aspects aren't clear, it might not be a well-baked action plan. So this helps them think through each of those details, make sure each piece is in place before they commit to this being the way to move forward. And all of this is things that often the manager themselves is filling out, but of course HR and top leadership have visibility to what's happening in their organizations so that they can help keep these plans on track and provide any kind of support where it's needed. And then there's the ongoing challenge, and that's really keeping this top of mind and sustained throughout the year. So managers can craft the best action plan, but if it doesn't stay at the top of the priority list, it's not going to drive lasting impact. These kinds of things are really about setting it up and then keeping each of those components moving throughout the calendar year, throughout the next survey cycle. So in order to keep things top of mind, we use a number of nudges to keep the wheels moving. And the first is really going back to social pressure. We want to continue to remind managers of their own good intentions and often to remind them of all the work they did to set up a really good action plan, remind them of all of the conversations they had with their teams, everything they learned about the dynamics of their team and what they wanted to set forward. So this can be done by sharing success stories of managers who have done really well in action planning and made lasting impact. It can be requesting public share outs of progress. So, if people know that they need to share every month how they're doing, they're likely to keep things moving so they have something good to share. Or, any other interactive ways of sharing that work in your company on a regular and predictable cadence. Emphasis there on that regular, predictable cadence. This isn't a one-time thing. This is really to be integrated into the kinds of conversations you have and the way people approach action planning and change management in a general sense. Another way to do that is setting up defaults. So, back to the point of integrating survey actions along with other processes. The survey is not something that lives out on its own. It's an integrated way that you drive change. So think about performance conversations, budget planning, team offsites, wherever these kinds of improvement conversations seem to fit. The more you bundle them together, the more they just become an integrated part of the conversation. So as you're looking at different kinds of planning throughout the year, if there's a space to discuss or promote survey action planning, add it in. It becomes an integrated part of that overall organizational effectiveness conversation that managers begin to expect. And over time, then they begin to plan for it. If they know it's coming, they're going to start to plan for it. And so, with all of this, I do want to say, I've been saying the word manager a lot. A lot of this is for the manager to actually do, but there are ways that those of us on the phone today and, broader HR and organizational effectiveness organizations can help by facilitating and communicating the importance of keeping this top of mind within that overall integrated system of change management and organizational effectiveness. And we want to think about that kind of support from a holistic perspective rather than individual pings or individual reminders. So designing these integrated systems and communicating the importance should be something that happens throughout the survey cycle and throughout the calendar year. It might start in the beginning with getting leadership buy-in to your survey as you design the content. So, one example I've found is talking to executives about what's most important. If an executive puts a specific topic or item on your survey, they're likely to be looking for those results and ready to talk about those. That's a commitment device based on their own priorities and what they just find to be most important. You can then put together reporting of results in a way that tells a story, that answers their questions, and begins to zero in on action planning areas that have to do with the overall operating of the business. And that's not even about nudging, that's just good results, rollout and analysis. And then you move into actual action planning activities that are woven into discussions, whether it's an agenda item on a regular team check-in or an org-wide town hall kinds of thing. Each of these will have some impact on their own, but they're ultimately going to have more impact as an ongoing integrated system that really involve everyone in the organization, from the individual line manager all the way up to the top of the organization at the leadership level. So before we end here, in just a couple minutes, I'd like to leave you with a couple of tips in designing these nudge systems within your own organization. The first is a reminder that a reminder in itself is not a nudge. A lot of technology systems out there are, really hot on having well-timed reminders, and those can be helpful. But without information on, how to act or making that action easier, it's not a nudge. So as you start to look at your different notification systems, make sure you're including information or resources that make it easier to take that action. And that leads into the next point of reducing cognitive load. To me, if you have to boil down the nudge and what's it supposed to do, it's reducing that cognitive load to make change easier. So in action planning, it often is in prioritizing. So make it really clear, what are managers supposed to do? Most managers want to do the right thing. So make it clear what's their assignment and what is, the top couple of things they should work on. The second is streamlining the process. Don't give them a 10-step process. Give them 3 steps or less. Anyone can do 3 steps. So make it really clear. And then the third part in reducing cognitive load is pairing bite-sized resources with need. So, at the close of your survey, don't send, huge guides of what to do. Managers are going to be overwhelmed, but time the resources they need, at that stage with what to do. So, there it's really about the streamlining and timing rather than providing all the resources you can possibly think of. So ultimately what this boils down to is making it easy for managers to take the next step. So, we're doing that by making it clear what they're supposed to do and pairing those resources as they go, so that we're not asking managers to become survey experts at each stage. We're just asking them to do one little thing at a time that over time is going to add up to lasting change. So, from there, I'd like to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions. So as you think about how you might use nudges in your program, consider if there are any specifics you'd like to talk through. In order to submit your question, please go to the GoToMeeting question function or chat function and type in what you'd like answered. I see a couple coming through here, so I'll do my best to answer them, and any others I'll certainly handle via email. The first one I'm seeing here is a question of the effectiveness of nudges and whether they're effective over time. So it says, are nudges effective over time? What happens if people just disable the reminders? And that's a great question, because if a nudge is simply just a pop-up or reminder, the effectiveness is essentially gone as soon as people disable those reminders or set some kind of spam filter to catch them. So I will go back to the research as far as what are the most effective kinds of nudges, and changing the default is most effective. So baking in what are the fields someone needs to fill out in order to make sure that they think through each of those steps is going to be far more effective than sending them a reminder on what kinds of fields to include in their nudge. So 2 things to take away is nudges are effective. It can reduce overtime. So, try to implement multiple types of nudges and really focus on the defaults if you can. And if you are using reminders as part of your nudges, make sure that you include content in those. I think people are much less likely to disable something that includes content. Second question is, what about nudges to other people in the company, like HR, individual employees? Yes, is the short answer. We talked about managers a lot here, but definitely think about nudges to others. An interesting one can be what individual people can do to make things better. So, at the end of the survey, if you remind people what topics were most important to them and point them to some resources, that can be a great way to enable them. And we are at the end of our time today, so I'm going to have to ask, that I address any of the other questions via email. And I will leave you with some information here about OrgVitality. We're an employee survey company. We live in the space that brings together robust employee research and our own proprietary technology. And I would be happy to chat more about that with any one of you in our follow-up. So thank you all for attending. I'll follow up with you each individually and hope to see you at our next webinar.